Xenoblade 2 has a ton of playable characters involved in the story. Whereas Xenoblade 1 contained 7 characters, the sequel has 11, and that's not counting the optional I can't believe it's not gambling characters of Rare Blades. As such, not all the characters are going to be perfectly unique. There will be parallels and similarities across at least some of them. However, you can still put characters in similar situations and circumstances, but have contrasting actions that establish who they are and what they believe in. Multiple characters can play off of a singular theme in the game, but in different ways, and provide more depth on that theme as a whole. One part of Xenoblade 2 that stands out to me is the world and how it's basically several different countries all with their own governments and geopolitical standing. Through this, there's an interesting theme here that I think most people don't talk about. National pride, and how national pride can influence one to act in their own interests or in the interests of a group. And of course, what better way to explore that theme than with two characters with sizable relevance to their nations? Zeke and Morag. Zeke and Morag are characters that seem to be regarded as good. They have solid designs, voice acting, and recognizable traits. However, they don't get much spotlight when it comes to the major themes of this game like relationships, life and death, and fear. I know being Special Inquisitor is difficult, Morag, but you're just not as mentally damaged as the girl on the box art. Part of the blame for this goes to the fact that they spend some of the game as enemies for various reasons. They do get their time to shine in the party itself, but they're also adults with their own responsibilities outside of saving the world. And the major responsibility they have in common is a responsibility to their Titan nations. Let's start with Morag. Despite being the eldest between two siblings, it was Morag's younger stepbrother Niall that ascended to the throne of Morardain, while Morag served as the Special Inquisitor. You can argue that while Niall was the brains meticulously managing the government from the capital, Morag was the brawn, being given the strongest blade in the Empire and becoming the strongest driver in the Empire. It is this duty to her country that draws her to the story in the first place, with Morag being afraid that the Aegis could be used as a weapon to sink Titans, specifically Morardain, once again. Our Special Inquisitor is very devout to the Ardanian Empire, and that's the other thing, it's an empire. It's expanding into Gormott and is built up as a grand power in the world of Allrest. But then you actually get there.
What the hell is this?
While we only see the upper collarbone and shoulder area of this bipedal titan, it is fair to assume the rest of Morardain is barren, industrialized wasteland. There is a reason they are expanding into Gormott because, like many other titans, theirs is dying at an alarming rate. While Ardanians have been able to make do with the hotter temperatures and their geothermal plants, they still need food and farming. The Titan isn't in the best of shape, but there's still a strong sense of national pride and the idea that Morag cares for her nation and its people. And she sees the best way to demonstrate that is to protect it at all costs. She may not be able to do much about the Titan's natural death, but she can still risk her life and throw herself into battle as she and the government deems necessary. All for the glorious Morardain. That's not quite how Zeke has seen things. While Morag will likely never be the true ruler of Morardain, Zeke is the crown prince of Tantal, with this very long name, befitting of such a title. Despite that, he constantly got in trouble with his father the king. Tantal has a strict isolationist policy with the other Titans, and despite that, Zeke was always leaving and exploring the rest of the world. As such, Zeke was banished from Tantal before he even would have legally obtained a driver's license here on Earth. Zeke runs into the party not on any business from Tantal, but on business from Indal, another nation. When the party eventually reaches Tantal, while the death of its titan is less apparent than Morardain, there is one striking difference. The city of Theoswar is horribly bleak. With the abject poverty, black market, and the lyrics of the choir music, it's no wonder why Zeke was always running away and had such a disdain for his father and the way he rules. Because this is the result. While Morardain is dying, there is still arguably some upside. It has an army, it has industrial factories and production, there is something to be prideful about within that titan. That, alongside Niall, are the main drivers for what Morag does in the beginning parts of the game. She actually cares about her country and is willing to do the duty assigned of her. Zeke not only does not want to fulfill the duty of a crown prince, he also just does not care about Tantal at all. He assumes a non-Tantalese name, develops an accent unlike the Tantalese, and would rather live in seeming poverty than as royalty of his nation. Side note, while I think the contact lens thing does point out how Pandoria and Zeke don't exactly have a lot of funds, I also like to think that Pandoria is speaking of colored contact lenses, since Zeke's gray eyes don't match the typical gold or blue seen in the Tantalese. Do colored lenses exist in this world? I don't know, but I just like to think that Zeke does not want to look Tantalese in the slightest. This sets up for the two royal figures to have very different priorities in the story. Morag cares more for her country, whereas Zeke cares more for himself and Pandoria as individuals. The two are then placed in basically the exact same spot right before they are set as mainstays in the group. Both are asked by their relative in royalty to accompany Rex and his gang to protect them and make sure the Aegis gets where she wants to go. Morag argues with Niall that her duty is to him and Morardain, and going on this kind of adventure would interfere with that and compromise the nation's safety. Zeke just says, "Lol, old man, I was gonna do that anyway, see you later." Zeke prioritizes his goals as an individual as higher than that of his group/nation, and acts as that independent individual. Morag, meanwhile, just can't break out from the idea that she is bound to her nation first and herself second. She wants to observe the Aegis' power in the hands of a perhaps soon-to-be historical warrior, but that's not in the best interest of Morardain. It takes Niall bringing up a greater duty not just to Morardain but to Allrest as a whole to tip Morag over into giving into her true feelings. You can argue that Morag's loyalty and pride in Morardain reins her in and prevents her from being a reckless kindred spirit like Zeke, but at the same time, being so attached to her nation, she loses a sense of her own happiness and desires. So how much does Morardain bleed itself into the life of a government official? Well, quite a lot. For a game that's all about relationships, Morag is quite lacking in that department. Sure, she has her trusted blade Brigid, but the two are so competent that they can be separated to take care of individual duties and be more efficient. Then there's Niall, Morag's own sibling who she only calls by his real name when he's on the verge of death. It's clear that the busy nature of running a nation has at least somewhat deteriorated their sibling relationship. They call each other mostly by their statuses within the Empire, and there honestly doesn't seem to be much there. They're both so caught up in their stations and responsibilities that that's what someone so dear to them has become, a station. Mithra even calls Morag out on this in one of my favorite heart-to-hearts, how Morag should try to rekindle an actual sibling relationship with Niall, because that's just what family does. And when you get valuable brother-sister advice from someone whose only sibling is another personality spawned from her trauma, that's a pretty good indication of how your relationship is going.
Of course I'm right. Obviously.
Have I ever not been right?
So with the need to uphold Morardain as a grand empire impeding on Morag's desires and her relationships, it's time to ask the question, is Morag happy? Can anyone be happy when they're so consumed by their responsibility to a nation? Well, kinda. I would describe it more as content. She's fine sacrificing her individual wants for the greater good of Morardain because that's what she sees her responsibility as. But if Morag lived her entire life like that, she never would have experienced the quest that the Aegis and everyone else went on. She never would have realized the greater goal of protecting Allrest as a whole and seeing just how far she would go to achieve that goal. And of course, she never would have aided the boy who would inspire people like the heroes of legend she had heard about. After all that, it's time to ask another question. Is Zeke happy? He's living his life vicariously, chasing down whatever he pleases whenever he pleases. Sure, he only has a companion in his blade Pandoria, just as Morag does in Brigid, but there's clearly more to their relationship than there is between Morag and Brigid. I mean, he's got part of Pandoria's crystal inside of him. So it seems that Zeke is succeeding where Morag seems to be failing. But he's not necessarily happy. He loathes the way his father runs the country, loathes how Tantal's isolationist policy serves only to protect Tantal, while the world falls into ruins. Despite being someone that has shown a large amount of individuality, Zeke still cares about the greater picture and protecting the world rather than just the needs of his own group/nation. He says in a heart-to-heart with Morag, "But is it really okay to just think of yourself?" It's revealed through this heart-to-heart that Zeke's goal is to do whatever he can to protect not only Tantal, but the entire world. It's something I'm assuming he made practically no headway on before joining up with Rex. So would Zeke really be happy chasing down a basically unachievable goal? Is he fine, realizing he's powerless to make a difference in the world? My money is on no. While Morag has the epiphany that she sometimes has to put her nation aside and focus on herself, Zeke has an epiphany that sometimes living as an individual isn't enough. Sure, it may not be the same as a nation, but Zeke acknowledges that he needs a group of people around him to achieve his goal of saving the world. You can live your life always thinking of more than yourself, always thinking about the group, or you can live your life thinking about yourself and not thinking you need a group. Neither will be quite fulfilling no matter how grand or unenviable that group is. There's happiness in being both selfless and selfish. While their separate nations influence them to different sides of the spectrum, it's being outside of their nation and having more experiences on this adventure that bring them closer to the middle of that scale. I also think it's very cool how Monolith had fleshed out these sort of political parallels in the game and made sure those settings and systems acted on the characters. It's not just Zeke and Morag, where the characters are from felt like it actually mattered, whether it's Moradin, Tantal, Leftheria, Torna, or the Trinity Core. The setting of these characters' past all influence their actions in the present, even if that past isn't explicitly depicted on screen. We don't know a whole lot about Morag and Zeke's upbringing, but we can see how their nations influenced them. We can see how national pride can cause someone to be more selfless and have their own inner desires clouded, and we can also see how a lack of national pride can make someone independent and all the more powerless.